She wore the same white dress 3 nights in a row. By the third night, no one at the party remembered why she'd come, but she did. The ballroom was gold. Not metaphorically, literally. Gold chandeliers dripped from cathedral ceilings like frozen honey. Gold trim lined the walls. Gold champagne bubbled in crystal flutes that caught the light and threw it back across hundreds of faces. All of them beautiful, all of them watching. And in the center of it all, Marilyn Monroe stood in a white dress. It wasn't new. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't even particularly well fitted. The hem had been sewn by hand 3 seasons ago, and if you looked closely, you could see where the stitching had started to come loose near her left hip. But it was hers. She'd worn it the night before, and the night before that. And tonight, as she stepped through the double doors into a room that fell silent the moment she appeared, she wore it again. Someone whispered, then someone else. The whispers moved like water through the crowd, rippling outward from where she stood. Is that the same dress? I think it is. Why would she? Marilyn didn't answer. She simply smiled. That smile, the one that photographers paid thousands for, the one that had launched 1,000 magazine covers and walked deeper into the gold. 3 nights ago she'd been someone else. Not literally, but close enough. 3 nights ago, Marilyn had stood in front of her bedroom mirror and tried on 7 different dresses. Black silk that made her look like a widow, red satin that screamed for attention, blue velvet that whispered elegance. Each one had been delivered by a studio assistant with explicit instructions. They want you to look like a star. She'd chosen the white one instead. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, in its own simple way. Not because it made a statement, though it did, quieter than she'd expected. She chose it because when she put it on and looked at herself in the mirror, she saw Norma Jean looking back, not Marilyn, not the icon, not the image, just her. The dress had no designer label, no studio approval, no publicist strategy behind it. It was hers because she'd bought it herself, 2 years ago, in a small shop on a side street she couldn't even remember the name of anymore. She'd paid for it with her own money, not studio funds, not borrowed glamour, and she'd worn it once, to a quiet dinner with a friend who didn't care about cameras. That was before everything became performance. Now, standing in the ballroom on night 1, she'd felt the eyes, she'd heard the murmurs, she'd seen the confusion ripple through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Why is she wearing that? And for the first time in months, Marilyn had felt something close to freedom. Night 2 had been different. She'd gone home after the first party and stood in front of her closet, door open, light spilling out across dozens of perfect dresses. Each one was a costume. Each one was armor. Each one was someone else's idea of who Marilyn Monroe should be. Her hand had reached for the black silk, then stopped. She thought about the whispers from the night before, the confused glances, the way people had looked at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. And she thought, what if I didn't solve it for them? So she wore the white dress again. This time, the reaction was louder, not scandalous. Nothing about Marilyn could ever truly be scandalous, not anymore, but noticeable. People stared. People pointed. A photographer asked if she was making a statement. What kind of statement? She'd asked back, genuinely curious. He didn't have an answer. That night, she'd received 3 phone calls. Her agent, her publicist, a studio executive who spoke in careful, measured tones about brand consistency and public image and concerning patterns. It's just a dress, she'd said. Nothing about you is just anything, he'd replied. She hung up before he could finish. By night 3, tonight, everyone knew. The white dress had become a story. Not the story she was telling, but the story everyone else was writing for her. Marilyn Monroe's fashion rebellion. Is Marilyn sending a message? The white dress. What does it mean? She'd read the headlines over breakfast, read them and laughed, bitter and bright because they'd missed the point entirely. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a calculated move, or a clever strategy, or a desperate cry for attention. It was just her, trying to feel like herself. But that, apparently, was revolutionary. Her publicist had called again that morning. Marilyn, darling, we need to talk about tonight. I'm wearing the dress. Silence. Then, you can't. Watch me. People are talking. Let them. They think you're having a breakdown. Marilyn had looked at herself in the mirror, phone pressed to her ear, white dress already laid out on her bed, like a quiet promise. Maybe I am, she'd said softly, or maybe I'm just tired of being someone I'm not. She hung up before he could respond. The party was different tonight. Not the setting. Still gold, still glittering, still full of beautiful people drinking expensive champagne and pretending their lives were perfect. But the energy had shifted. People weren't just looking at her anymore. They were studying her, analyzing her, trying to decode what the white dress meant, as if she were a riddle that needed solving. A man in a tuxedo approached. She didn't know his name, but she recognized his type. Important, influential, used to being listened to. Marilyn, he said, voice smooth as silk, everyone's talking about your dress. Are they? You must know you're causing quite a stir. She sipped her champagne. I'm just wearing a dress. Nothing you do is just anything, He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So what's the angle? New designer you're promoting? Some kind of minimalist movement? A statement about excess? Marilyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but calculation behind his eyes. He didn't care about her answer. He cared about being able to say he'd figured it out first. It's not an angle, she said quietly. Then what is it? She paused, choosing her words carefully. It's mine. He blinked, confused. I don't understand. I know. She walked away before he could ask another question. The terrace was quieter. Marilyn had slipped away from the ballroom, champagne glass in hand, and found herself outside under a sky full of stars. The city stretched out below her, a carpet of lights that went on forever, each one representing someone else's life, someone else's story, someone else's truth. She wondered how many of them felt like her, trapped in an image, suffocated by expectations, drowning in other people's ideas of who they should be. Mind if I join you? She turned. A woman stood in the doorway, older, elegant, with silver hair and kind eyes. Please, Marilyn said. The woman stepped onto the terrace and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the city. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, I wore the same dress to 3 parties once. Marilyn looked at her, surprised. The woman smiled. It was 1943. I was young, and I'd just moved to Hollywood, and I had exactly one nice dress, so I wore it to every party, every premiere, every event, and people talked. Oh, they talked. But you know what I learned? What? That the people who mattered didn't care what I wore, and the people who cared didn't matter. Marilyn felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd been holding closed for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Does it get easier? She asked quietly. The woman considered. No, but you get stronger. They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 women in a world that demanded they be everything except themselves. Why did you really wear it 3 times? The woman asked eventually. Marilyn looked down at the white dress, at the hand-sewn hem and the simple lines and the complete absence of artifice. Because it's the only thing I own that doesn't belong to anyone else. When Marilyn returned to the ballroom, everything had changed. Not the room, not the people, not even the whispers that followed her like a shadow. What had changed was her. She walked through the gold and the glitter with her head high, white dress catching the light, and for the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She wasn't playing a role. She wasn't being Marilyn Monroe, the icon, the image, the impossible standard. She was just being. Someone tried to stop her. Another question, another demand for explanation, but she kept walking, past the photographers, past the executives, past everyone who thought they owned a piece of her. She walked until she reached the center of the ballroom, right under the massive chandelier, where the light was brightest and everyone could see, and then she stopped. The room fell silent. She didn't make a speech, didn't offer an explanation, didn't give them the story they wanted, the narrative they could package and sell. She simply stood there, in her white dress, and let them look. Let them see, not Marilyn Monroe the star, but the woman underneath, the one who was tired of costumes, tired of performance, tired of being everyone's fantasy and no one's reality. Let them see her. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The whispers stopped, the judgment faded, the confusion melted away, because for just a second, everyone in that room saw her, not as an icon, but as a person, fragile and strong, vulnerable and brave, human, just human. A woman in the crowd started to clap, then another, not because they understood the white dress, not because they got the message or decoded the meaning, but because they saw her trying, saw her fighting, saw her choosing herself, even when the world demanded she choose their version of her instead. The applause grew, filling the ballroom like thunder, and Marilyn stood in the center of it all and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Marilyn hung the white dress in her closet. Tomorrow she'd probably wear something else. Tomorrow, the studio would call with their demands, and the press would write their stories, and the world would go back to wanting her to be Marilyn Monroe, perfect and untouchable and not quite real. But tonight, she'd been herself, and 3 nights had been enough to remember what that felt like. She looked at the dress, hanging simple and quiet among all the elaborate costumes, and she smiled. It was just a dress, but it was hers, and sometimes that was revolutionary enough. The cameras would capture 1,000 more images of Marilyn Monroe. The magazines would print 1,000 more stories. The world would continue to project their dreams and desires and demands onto the woman with the platinum hair and the perfect smile. But she would always remember the white dress, not because it was beautiful though it was, not because it made a statement though it did, but because for 3 nights, it let her be Norma Jean again. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when the whole world wants you to be someone else. The white dress taught her that, and she never forgot. Marilyn woke to sunlight streaming through white curtains, and for a moment, just one perfect crystalline moment, she didn't remember who she was supposed to be. Then the phone rang. She let it ring, once, twice, 7 times before silence returned. The white dress lay draped over a chair in the corner, catching the morning light like a ghost of the night before. She remembered the party, remembered the confused faces, and the whispered questions, and the way her publicist had cornered her near the bar. "Darling, what are you doing? Wearing a dress? That dress, what's wrong with it?" He'd looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Nothing's wrong with it, it's just not what people expect." And there it was, the unspoken rule that governed her entire existence. Be what people expect, be the fantasy, be the dream, be anything except yourself. She'd smiled that night, the smile that cameras loved, and walked away without answering. Now, in the quiet morning light, she walked to her closet, opened it, looked at the dozens of perfect dresses hanging in perfect rows, each one chosen by someone else, each one designed to make her into someone else's vision of Marilyn Monroe. Her hand moved past all of them, landed on the white dress. She'd thought about wearing something different tonight, something that would make people stop talking, something that would let her slip back into the comfortable anonymity of being exactly what everyone expected. But standing there, sunlight on her skin, she thought, what if I didn't? What if she wore the dress again? Not to make a statement, not to rebel, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because it made her feel like herself. The phone rang again. She ignored it. The dress hung on a padded hanger, steamed and pressed, while Marilyn sat at her vanity applying makeup, foundation, powder, the perfect red lip, the beauty mark, carefully drawn exactly where it should be. Each stroke of the brush was a ritual, transforming Norma Jean into Marilyn, the real woman into the image. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the first time she'd bought a dress with her own money, really her own money, not studio funds or borrowed cash or money that came with strings attached. She'd been 23, just starting to taste success, and she'd walked into a small boutique on a side street in West Hollywood. The saleswoman hadn't recognized her, hadn't fawned or flattered or tried to guess what Marilyn Monroe would want. She'd simply asked, "What do you like?" And Marilyn had realized she didn't know. She'd spent so long becoming what other people wanted that she'd lost track of her own preferences, her own style, her own taste. The white dress had been on a clearance rack. Simple, unpretentious, the kind of dress a regular woman might wear to a nice dinner or a Sunday afternoon garden party. Nothing about it screamed Hollywood. Nothing about it demanded attention. She'd tried it on in a cramped dressing room and looked at herself in the mirror and thought, this is me. Not the bombshell, not the siren, not the fantasy, just her. She'd bought it without hesitation. Now, 2 years later, she reached for it again. The phone rang. Again. She already knew what the voice on the other end would say. Concern wrapped in corporate speak, questions disguised as care, demands dressed up as suggestions. "We just want to make sure you're okay." Translation: "We just want to make sure you're behaving. Maybe you should take some time off." Translation: "Maybe you should stop doing things we can't control. We're worried about you." Translation: "We're worried about our investment." Marilyn let the phone ring until it stopped. Then she stepped into the white dress and felt herself breathe for the first time all day. This time they were waiting for her. Marilyn saw it the moment she stepped through the doors. The way conversation paused mid-sentence. The way heads turned in perfect synchronization. The way every eye in the room locked onto her white dress like it was a mystery that needed solving. A photographer appeared immediately, camera raised. "Marilyn, over here, give us the smile." She gave it, the smile, the pose, the perfect angle that magazines paid for. But inside, she was counting the seconds until she could leave, counting the drinks she'd need to get through the night, counting the cost of being Marilyn Monroe, public property, forever on display. "Is that the same dress from last night?" The question came from a woman in emerald green, dripping with diamonds that probably cost more than most people's houses. "Yes," Marilyn said simply. "Oh," the woman blinked, clearly expecting more explanation. When none came, she laughed uncomfortably. "Well, it's lovely, lovely," the word people used when they meant something else entirely. Marilyn moved through the party like a ghost, present, but not really there. She shook hands, made small talk, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, did all the things that Marilyn Monroe was supposed to do. But the whole time she felt the dress against her skin, felt the way it didn't constrict or demand or perform, felt the way it simply was. A man in a grey suit approached, industry type, the kind who spoke in numbers and deals and box office returns. "Interesting choice," he said, gesturing to her dress. "Is it? Everyone's talking about it. Are they?" She kept her voice light, but inside she felt something harden. "Some people think you're trying to say something. Some people think a lot of things." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, is this some kind of publicity stunt? Because if it is, it's brilliant, very meta." Marilyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but calculation. He didn't see her. He saw an opportunity, a story, an angle. "It's not a stunt," she said quietly. "Then what?" "It's just a dress I like." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone with his theories and his strategies and his complete inability to understand that sometimes a dress is just a dress, and sometimes it's everything. Midnight, home again. Dress hung carefully in the closet. The phone rang. This time she answered. Marilyn, her agent's voice tight with controlled frustration. We need to talk. Hello to you too. What are you doing? Unwinding after a party. How was your evening? Don't deflect. You know what I'm talking about. The dress. Marilyn sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted. It's just a dress, Richard. Nothing you wear is just anything. You know that. Every choice you make is a headline. Every outfit is a statement. And this, whatever this is, people are starting to ask questions. Let them ask. Are you having some kind of crisis? Are you? Silence. Then, I'm serious, Marilyn. The studio is concerned. They think I'm not being Marilyn Monroe enough. They think you're acting erratically. I wore a dress twice. That's not erratic. That's normal. Regular people do it all the time. You're not regular people. And there it was. The truth that everyone danced around but no one ever said directly. You're not allowed to be normal. You're not allowed to be human. You're not allowed to be anything except what we need you to be. What if I want to be? She asked softly. What? Regular, normal, just me. Richard sighed. Marilyn, darling, you stopped being just you. The moment you became famous. That's the trade. That's the price. What if I don't want to pay it anymore? Another silence. Longer this time. Then you lose everything, he said finally. The career, the fame, the life you've built. All of it. Is that really what you want? Marilyn looked across her bedroom at the white dress, hanging quiet and true in the darkness. I don't know, she whispered, but I think I need to find out. She hung up before he could argue. Morning of the third day, Marilyn stood in front of her closet, door open, decision stretching before her like a crossroads. On the left, every dress that represented Marilyn Monroe, glamour and sparkle and carefully curated perfection, safety in the known, comfort in the expected, the path back to who everyone needed her to be. On the right, the white dress, simple, honest, hers. She'd received 17 phone calls since midnight, 12 emails, 6 telegrams, all saying variations of the same thing. Stop, change, comply, be the Marilyn everyone knows. Her publicist had threatened to quit. Her agent had scheduled an emergency meeting. A studio executive had sent flowers with a card that read, "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. I know you'll make the right choice." The right choice, meaning the choice they wanted. Marilyn reached for the white dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it from the hanger. Not from fear, not from doubt, from resolve. Because somewhere between night 1 and night 3, between the whispers and the phone calls and the demands that she stop being herself, she'd realized something fundamental. They could take everything from her, her career, her fame, her image, her name, but they couldn't take her choice. And if the only choice she had left was what dress to wear, then she'd make that choice count. She'd wear the white dress tonight, not because it was rebellious or strategic or calculated. She'd wear it because it was hers, and because sometimes the smallest acts of self-determination are the most revolutionary. She stepped into the dress, zipped it up, looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in 3 days, she didn't see Marilyn Monroe looking back. She saw herself. The car pulled up to the venue at exactly 8:30. Marilyn sat in the back seat, white dress glowing in the streetlights, and felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. She knew what waited for her inside. The stares, the whispers, the judgments passed by people who would never understand that courage sometimes looks like a simple white dress worn 3 nights in a row. Her driver opened the door. Miss Monroe. She took a breath, stepped out into the camera flashes. The photographers erupted. Marilyn, over here, is that the same dress? What are you trying to say? Are you making a statement? She didn't answer, didn't explain, simply walked toward the entrance with her head high and her resolve higher. This was it. The third night. The completion of something she hadn't even known she was starting when she'd first chosen the white dress. A reporter pushed through the crowd, microphone extended. Marilyn, the people want to know, why the same dress 3 times? She paused, looked directly into his eyes. Because I wanted to, she said simply, and walked inside before he could ask another question. The moment she stepped through those double doors, the entire room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No record scratch, no sudden silence. Just a subtle ripple of awareness that moved through the crowd like wind through wheat. She wore it again. Marilyn felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of their collective gaze, heavy with expectation and judgment and fascination. But she also felt something else. Pride. Not the ego-driven kind that comes from knowing you look perfect, but the deeper kind that comes from knowing you're being true to yourself, even when the whole world wants you to be someone else. She moved into the gold and the glitter, white dress stark against all the color and flash. And she didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't perform. She simply existed. And that, apparently, was enough to make her dangerous. They came at her in waves. First, the curious ones. People who genuinely wanted to understand. Marilyn, I have to know, is there a story behind the dress? Yes, she'd answer. It's mine. Then the concerned ones. People who saw nonconformity as a cry for help. Are you okay? Really okay? Because if you need someone to talk to, I'm fine, she'd say. Better than I've been in a long time. Then the angry ones. People who took her choice as a personal offense. Do you have any idea how this looks? What people are saying? I imagine they're saying I wore the same dress 3 times, she'd reply calmly. And finally, the calculating ones. People who saw opportunity in everything. This is brilliant marketing. Who's your new publicist? I need their number. To these she said nothing at all, because they were all missing the point. This wasn't about them, wasn't about publicity or statements or brilliant strategies. It was about her, about reclaiming one small corner of her life, about proving to herself that she could make one choice, just one, that wasn't dictated by fear or expectation or someone else's vision of who she should be. It was about the white dress, but more than that, it was about the woman wearing it. She found herself alone on the terrace again. Same spot as the night before, same stars overhead, but everything felt different now. On night 2, she'd been questioning, wondering if she was doing the right thing, if the cost was worth the choice. Tonight, she knew. The door opened behind her. She half expected the silver-haired woman from the previous evening, but instead, a young actress stepped out, couldn't have been more than 22, wide-eyed and nervous, wearing a dress that probably cost more than a car. Miss Monroe, her voice was hesitant. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. The girl stepped closer, fingers twisting in the fabric of her expensive dress. I just wanted to say thank you. Marilyn turned, surprised. For what? For the dress, for wearing it 3 times, she trailed off, searching for words, for showing me that it's okay to be yourself, even when everyone wants you to be something else. Something tightened in Marilyn's chest. You're new to all this? 6 months, and already I feel like I'm drowning, like I'm becoming someone I don't recognize. They tell me how to dress, how to talk, who to be seen with, what to say in interviews, and I forgot that I could say no. Marilyn saw herself in this girl, saw Norma Jean at 22, wide-eyed and eager, before Hollywood had gotten its hooks in deep. You can always say no, she said softly. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price. Is it worth it? Marilyn looked down at her white dress, thought about the phone calls, and the pressure, and the threats disguised as concern. Yes, she said. Even if they take everything else, they can't take who you are. Not unless you let them. The girl smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I bought a dress last week. With my own money. It's yellow. I love it. But my publicist said it makes me look washed out. Wear it anyway. Really, especially if you love it. They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 women at different points on the same difficult journey. What happens tomorrow? The girl asked eventually. After tonight? Marilyn considered. I don't know. Maybe they fire me. Maybe they blacklist me. Maybe nothing changes at all. But at least I'll know I tried. Tried what? To be myself. When Marilyn walked back inside, she noticed something had shifted. The whispers had softened. The judgmental stares had transformed into something else. Something that looked almost like respect. Because people could see now what she'd been doing. Could see that the white dress wasn't a breakdown, or a publicity stunt, or a cry for attention. It was an act of self-preservation. A woman choosing herself in a world that demanded she choose everyone else first. And maybe, just maybe, they recognized the courage that took. She moved through the ballroom one last time, white dress glowing under the chandeliers, and she didn't perform, didn't smile for the cameras, didn't give them the Marilyn Monroe they expected. She gave them something rarer, truth. The evening wound down, guests began to leave, the golden light dimmed, and Marilyn stood in the center of it all. 3 nights completed, choice made, price paid, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to remember what freedom tasted like, enough to fight for it again. Sunrise found Marilyn at her window, coffee in hand, white dress hung carefully in her closet. The phone had already started ringing, headlines were probably already being written. The industry machine was already churning, trying to make sense of her choice, trying to fit it into a narrative they could understand and control. But she didn't pick up the phone. Instead, she stood at the window and watched the city wake up. Watched regular people start their regular days, wearing regular clothes, making regular choices that no one analyzed or judged or dissected, and she thought, that's all I wanted, just one regular choice. The white dress had given her that. 3 nights, 1 dress, a lifetime of meaning. She'd probably face consequences, probably lose opportunities, probably hear whispers for months about the time Marilyn Monroe wore the same dress 3 nights in a row and everyone lost their minds. But she'd also proven something to herself, that she could choose, that she could resist, that she could be Norma Jean, even if only for 3 nights, even if only in a simple white dress, and sometimes, that was revolutionary enough. The phone rang again. This time, she picked up. Hello, Marilyn, her agent's voice, tight but resigned. We need to talk about damage control. She looked at the white dress, hanging quiet and true in her closet. No, she said softly, we don't, and for the first time in her career, she hung up first.